I was a highly decorated officer. I've never been in trouble in my entire life. This is my department coming at me because I spoke out against corruption within the agency. These guys were leaving with all kind of thousands of dollars. And I say, you guys, you know better than the ones we just put in the paddy wagon. You guys should be going to jail yourself. So when I get to the front of my yard, 60-some cops storm me at gunpoint. The only way you can get a Gold Cross recipient is by risking your life to save another individual life. I risked my life doing an armed carjacking. He says, Ray, I'm telling you, you're faced with natural life imprisonment. This is the feds. The feds got a 98.8% conviction rate. I told him, I said, God got a conviction rate of 0%. I'd rather go to prison for the rest of my life because I'm not going to admit to something that I did not do. I haven't done nothing wrong. I've been fighting ever since I was 6 years of age, man. Ever since I was 6 years old, I've been fighting. I tried to put my fist through his brains. And he gonna tell me, I make sure, I said, I eat mace. When I tell you these people literally try to destroy me, man, they put me in the hole for 5 months. How do you help your family, man? You know, your kids asking you, Daddy, when you coming home? I tell them soon. 6 months going by, a year going by, going in 2 years, you know? I keep telling them soon.
I mean, I know all that. Like everything you're saying, I know. Mm-hmm. So I just try not to think about it. Hey, this is Matt Cox, and I am here with Raymond Hicks. And Raymond Hicks has a story. He is a former sheriff deputy?
Yes.
What county?
Broward County.
He is a former Broward County sheriff's deputy, and he's got an extremely interesting story about a cover-up and corruption, and we're going to get into it, and I appreciate you guys watching, so check out the video. Okay, so, I mean, we've been talking for a little bit, but, yes. So, you know, basically I just like to, start, at the beginning, you know, where you grew up.
Okay.
You know, you talked about your mom.
Yes.
Where were you raised?
I was born in Vero Beach. I was raised in a place called Gifford, Florida, as well as Fort Lauderdale. So every year I came down here just to be with my family in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay. What about your dad? Was your dad around or?
Yes, my father, he wasn't always in my life. He walked away maybe around about 12 years of age. But he's from a city called Wellborn, Florida, which I've never been there before. And my mother, she's actually from Moultrie, Georgia. So right. I guess the two of them met in Gifford, Florida. And I guess that's where they got married at, if I'm not mistaken.
All right. Brothers, sisters?
Yes, I have one. My sister's deceased now. She was 46 years of age. She passed away. And so it's just me, my mother, and my brother. My brother is actually 54 years of age.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school at Vero Beach High School.
Okay. What about, did you play football?
Yes, I played football. I was a standout athlete for the Vero Beach High School. I played football, basketball, also ran track. You know, I shattered records. You know, I was one of Vero Beach top athletes.
So, I mean, did you ever get in trouble in school?
No, I never got in trouble in school, but I did have a lot of fights in school, you know, when it come down to bullies, because my father, I felt like my dad was a bully, you know, when him and my mom always engaged into some type of form of verbal confrontation that led to a physical altercation, you know, sometimes stabbing, cutting. My mother was shot, you know, by my dad. He went to prison, did about 8 years imprisonment. And so when I went to school, you know, if I saw a bully, I would confront the bully, you know. And I always said, you know, you want to fight with somebody that's going to give you a fight. You know, don't pick on somebody who's not going to fight someone that's going to fight you.
So wait, so your dad went to prison for stabbing your mom?
No, my father went to prison for actually shooting one of his best friends for touching my mother's leg.
Okay.
Yeah, apparently this gentleman by the name of Mr. Knott, that's what they call him. And from what I was informed, is that he touched my mom's leg, and my dad found out about it. So my father went to this place called Under the Tree. This is a place where all the adults get together. They play cards, dominoes, they drink and stuff like that. So of course, when my father saw him there, you know, my dad confronted him and asked him, hey, Knott, you know, I heard that you touched my wife's leg. And him and my dad was best of friends. And he said, well, if I touch her leg, what you gonna do? So my father said, well, if you tell me that you touch her leg, I'm gonna shoot you, man. So he said, yes, I touched her leg. And of course, my dad pulled from what I was informed, a chrome 32 with a pearl handle. And he pointed the gun at his face. And when he pulled the trigger, I know from being in law enforcement, he jerked the trigger, which at that particular time, the bullet went past him. And he said, you didn't hit me. He said, no, I didn't get you that time, but I get you this time. So the second shot actually hit him in his neck area. And my father did 8 years in prison for that.
He didn't die. Just attempted murder.
Yeah.
So did you ever visit him in prison?
No, I never went to visit my father in prison. My mom did, but I didn't.
Okay. So you graduated high school. You went to college?
Yes, I went to college at Missouri Southern State University in Joplin, Missouri. And of course, that's where I met my wife at back in 1984. And of course, she actually left college to go into the Navy. My freshman year, I was run up for the Rookie of the Year award. My sophomore year, I broke all the Russian records. Going into my junior year, I actually became an All-American. And she went into the Navy and they gave her orders to go to Scotland. So my wife and I, we made a decision to try and conceive a child. And she came home on a leave for about 2 weeks, back to Missouri where I was. And of course, we worked on trying to, conceive a child, and that's when she got pregnant. And apparently they stationed her to Pascagoula, Mississippi. So when she went there, she was given an order to go to Scotland. So that's when I went to my coach and I told him, I said, I'm going to leave school. He said, Ray, what do you mean you're going to leave school? I was looking at me going in my sophomore year as well as my junior year. I scored every game. Every game that I played in out there in Missouri, I scored. And he said, man, listen, we need you here, And of course, they called the Master Chief and some other peoples in the Navy. And of course, they said, once we give you orders, you got to proceed with the orders. And that's when she wound up in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I left college. I went to Pascagoula, Mississippi, where we was rooming with her and some other friends of hers. So they was in, they paid half of the rent. We paid half of the rent. I got a job working at the port of Pascagoula, Mississippi, which is where the ship was stationed at, And I made a decision, to come back to South Florida. So my wife actually got a car, which was a Chevette. It was a red Chevette. I think it was 1984, if I'm not mistaken. I got the car and I drove back here to Florida, to Fort Lauderdale, and then I got a job working as a construction worker. And that's when I decided to apply for the Broward Sheriff Office because I was majoring in criminal justice. So 11/17/1986 is when I got hired with the Broward Sheriff Office as a detention officer.
Okay. All right. So you didn't graduate?
No, I didn't graduate at that particular time, but I did eventually. I went back to school after all these things that we're going to talk about.
Right.
And I got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and forensic science from American Intercontinental University in 2011.
Okay, so I'm sorry. So you start off as working in the jail. Is that
Yes.
it? Right.
Yes.
That's where they start off almost everybody, though, right?
Well, a lot of people don't really want to work in the jails, because number one, a lot of people's afraid to work in the jail. But me growing up the way I grew up, my thing was to try and inspire other people to say, hey, I made it out the hood, so can you.
Right.
As a matter of fact, one of the guys that I've known for many, many years had a shootout with one of the, Scott Israel, who was just a regular patrolman for the city of Fort Lauderdale. This was before he became sheriff for Broward County. We call him G Fresh, but his name was Gaston Akins. And of course, him and Scott had a shootout. G was selling drugs. And of course, I got on him. I'm like, G, every time you turn around, the recidivism rate is constantly growing, man. You in and out the system, man. When you going to change your life? You need to do something that's positive, man. And, I told him, I said, look at me. I came from where you came from, but I made it. He was like, yeah, you was one of the good ones. I said, but so can you, man. What about your family? But anyway, make a long story short, after going to prison about 2 or 3 years, 3 times he went to prison, he made a decision that he came home, got a construction job, and he became a foreman. And then he became a superintendent, and his kids actually worked out with the Miami Dolphins, Jonathan Akins. His other son worked out with Jacksonville Jaguars. His name is Marquise Aiken. So, people can change, man, and that was my whole thing. I didn't want to become a product of my environment, but I want my environment to become a product of who I am. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go and work in the jail, to really inspire people to say, man, change your life around.
Well, how long did you work in the jail?
I worked in the jail from 1986 up until 1994.
Wow.
I actually started working in boot camp. They sent me to special training at Fort McCullum Drill Sergeant School. I became a drill instructor for the Broward Sheriff Office, with young kids from age 15 to 35 years of age. They were sentenced to boot camp or regiment training. At the completion of the training, they can get probation or released, by the judge instead of going to prison. So they had to go through a 90 days regiment training. That's if they passed the class. And in 1996, I decided to go through the Crossover Academy, which was from correction to law enforcement at Palm Beach Community College in West Palm Beach.
Did they ask you to go from the jail to be a part of that program, or is that something that you wanted to do?
Well, they asked me to be a part of the program, the boot camp program, and certain people, they chose to go up to Fort McCullum Drill Sergeant School, and you had to be certified in order for you to work in the capacity as a drill instructor.
Okay.
So of course, I went up there. It was really hard, man. It was very intense. Those drill sergeants, they don't give you anything. If you get it, you're going to earn it.
Right.
And they tell you. And a lot of people fail. But I was one of the ones that passed. But it was extremely hard, though.
So you went through that, and then you went to the sheriff's office?
No, I was already at the sheriff's office.
That's right. I know it's all a part of the jail. The
Yes.
whole thing is all part of that. I'm sorry.
Yes, it's all a part of the jail. Like once you come from jail, they had a boot camp program,
Right,
where they sent us these inmates to go through a regiment training to keep them from going to prison. So they feel like, this is their last chance, before we send you to prison. So from 15 years of age to 35, the judge could order them to go to boot camp. And upon successfully completing the boot camp program, then they will actually let that person out, back out on the streets. It's almost like a second chance in a sense.
right. And then, but you only did that for so long.
I did that up until 1996, and that's when I went through the Crossover Academy in Palm Beach. So I was actually a drill instructor, but I was going to school at night in Palm Beach to go from correction to law enforcement.
See, I feel like you're saying law enforcement. So you mean as what? As other than the jail, what were you? Were you like a regular cop or like a detective, or am I?
No, just a regular deputy sheriff.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can go from correction. It's called the Crossover Academy.
Okay.
So in order for you to work in the capacity as a deputy sheriff out on the streets, you have to go through what you call Crossover Academy. So you go from correction to law enforcement.
Okay. See, to me, correction. When you're saying law enforcement, I'm thinking a deputy I'm thinking that a prison guard is law enforcement. But you're saying no, that's not.
No, they're just a regular
that's corrections.
Yeah, that's just a regular detention officer or correction.
Okay.
Yeah. And then you have to go through the Crossover Academy in order for you to become a deputy sheriff.
Right. And then so what did you do as a deputy?
Well, backing up for a second, I actually in 1990. I was called out of the jail to work narcotics, so since they was choosing certain individuals, who had street level, knowledge or whatnot, you can use this street lingo like, yo, my nigga, I got them parlays, what's happening, and that type of language or whatnot, and of course, they had me and several other guys they brought out of the jail, and we would go out and we posed as undercover sellers. So we had informants that we would send into a certain particular location. Once that informant go there, we give them the Ziploc package with the cocaine rock. There's a serial number on the package, and also the money was always marked. So we would send that informant into the location, and that informant would make the transaction with the dealer, and would come back and give us the intel in reference to who the person was they made contact with, what they were wearing, and whatnot. And of course, we would move in, backup would move in and take those guys into custody. And then we would get out there and pose as undercover sellers.
Okay. Yeah, because it was like when Bobby was here, he worked undercover too. And I think didn't he say he worked undercover? Did Bobby ever work undercover?
I think Bobby did say he worked undercover for a short period of time, but I know he said he had informants that he used to go into like different areas or whatnot.
I was just gonna say it was I interviewed a sheriff the other day. Mm-hmm. He had worked undercover, right? Do you remember the sheriff? He had worked undercover, but it was the same thing. It's like, it'd be like, I'm not gonna be able. I'm always gonna come off like a cop. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're gonna look at me like anytime I tell somebody I was in prison, they're like, come on, man.
Right.
Look at you.
Right. Because you have the buzz cut.
Yeah. They're like, you come on. Like, I would joke around. I'd see you walking in prison. I'd see the black guys and they go, hey, cops, what's up? And I go, I can't call it. They go, stop. Don't even try, bro.
Right.
No, I did. I pulled that off. They go, stop it. You sound more white than you already are when you try. And I couldn't pull it off. But yeah, there's some guys that they could just, because they can spot if you're on the street, you can almost always spot them. Like, you got to know how to talk.
Oh yeah, and not only that, if you're from the street, you can really tell. They back in the days they call them 50 and 99.
Yeah.
Yo man, my nigga, what's happening, man? They go 99. They go 99, 50. That's the type of street lingo that they used back in the days to say, hey, there's the cops. Mm-hmm. The cops are coming. Especially if they was out there selling drugs, because when I came here to Fort Lauderdale, the park, which is called Franklin Park, it was notorious for illegal activity. Always constantly, drug activity going on out there. It was on a regular basis. You got 4, 5, 6 guys running up the cars. You got about 4 or 5 guys in one car trying to sell money, to get the person to buy the rock. And of course, a lot of times, these people, man, how do I know this? Is because I was out there selling myself.
Right.
And it got to a point where I began to watch a lot of corruption goes on, where they was planting drugs, they were beating young black offenders to the ground, they was taking money from them. I told them that it was morally wrong and totally unethical, and I was not going to indulge in that practice. One of the locations that we went to, they were selling the cocaine rocks for like $50 and $60 in this particular location. A rock cost $10. So at the end of the night, you're supposed to take all the drugs and the money and you put it in a manila folder and you put red tape on there, says evidence. And of course, and you put a signature on there. So just in case someone try and break that seal, you'll know that it's been tampered with. And these guys were leaving with all kind of thousands of dollars. And I say, you guys, better than the ones we just put in the paddy wagon. You guys should be going to jail yourself. They told me to mind my business. I said, what do you mean mind my business? I said, you guys are just as guilty as the one that we just arrested not too long ago.
And this is when you were in the jail, when they pulled you out?
When they pulled me out. But also I started working out there, and I think it was around about 1998, 99, when I was working with Drug Task Force, OCD, which is organized crime in the cradle within 1,000 feet of a school, 3 years in state penitentiary. And of course, we was out there doing buy buses. Right. Where we would sell drugs to the sellers, and we did a sweep first. We take all the drug dealers off the street. We put them in a paddy wagon, and of course, we get out there. Our commander come to us and give us X amount of rocks and money to make transaction with the subjects as they come to purchase the narcotics. Okay. And what we used to do is we either tip our hat or we'll take the towel off our shoulder, and that gives the indication to backup for them to move in and take the person into custody. So when backup proceed to move in, we'll run away like we had nothing to do with the situation, because that's what most dope boys do. Yeah, that's what
they do, yeah.
Yeah.
Rossini, in the 1990s, was a 20-something-year-old Los Angeles-based drug trafficker of ecstasy and ice. He and his associates drove luxury European supercars, lived in Beverly Hills penthouses, and dated Playboy models while dodging federal indictments. Then, 2 FBI officers with the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force entered the picture. Dirty agents willing to fix cases and identify informants. Suddenly, 2 of Rossini's associates, confidential informants working with federal law enforcement, were murdered. Everyone pointed to Rossini. As his co-defendants prepared for trial, U.S. Attorney Robert Mueller sat down to debrief Rossini at Leavenworth Penitentiary, and another story emerged. A tale of FBI corruption and complicity in murder. You see, Pierre Rossini knew something that no one else knew. The truth. And Robert Mueller and the federal government have been covering it up to this very day. Devil Exposed. A twisted tale of drug trafficking, corruption, and murder in the City of Angels. Available on Amazon and Audible.
And so, okay, so you're telling these guys, hey, you guys are pulling, you're pocketing money. Like you guys are pulling, the other officers are putting money in their own pocket.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They're telling you to mind your own business.
Yes.
Even though, me just having been in the system and seeing the way things work, to me, it's like, oh, no, like if I'm here, you're including me in the conspiracy. Like if I'm just here knowing about it,
right?
Like, so it is my business,
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons I told myself, listen, man, I don't get on like that, man. You guys are wrong. This morally wrong and totally unethical what you guys doing. They told me mind my business. What do you mean mind my business? I said, you guys are no different than the ones we just arrested and put in the paddy wagon. You guys should be going downtown yourself. And at this point, it came to, they didn't like me being out there. They was like, hey, you can't work out here anymore. I said, I don't give a flying, you know what? And we're going to put you back in the jail. I said, I started in the jail. So they put me back in the jail. I think I was working on the 6th floor. And of course, I go home. I went to work and I worked from 7 to 3. When I came home, I think I went to bed around about maybe 3:30. I took a shower, went to bed. I normally wake up around about 5:30 to go in my backyard and work out. I had over 600 some pounds in my backyard. And in the process of me going to work out, I look across the street at the Citgo, and there's either the drug task force or the SWAT team mounting up. So I told my neighbor who was working out with me, I said, man, that's either the drug task force or the SWAT team over there, and when they saw me, they all jumped in the cars and sped down the back street. So I told them, I said, let's go to the front of my yard, man. So when I get to the front of my yard, 60 some cops stormed me at gunpoint, had me and my kids at gunpoint. My kids were 12 and 7 years of age during this time. My wife had gone to Winn-Dixie, just to pick up some groceries. And I think it was my oldest daughter that called my wife and said, hey, mommy, they got daddy here. And so I'm asking them questions. I said, what is this? What is this for? You Ray Hicks? I said, you guys know I'm Ray Hicks, man. What's the problem? We got one for your arrest. I said, one for who arrest? What did I do? And so this black guy named Ricky Clark, he come patting me at my shoulder, assuring me that everything was going to be okay. So I'm like, what? He's like, Ray, calm down. I said, man, Ricky, what you mean calm down, Ricky? I said, what the freak you mean, Ricky, calm down? I said, what did you guys got a warrant for my arrest for what? What did I do? Tell me what I did. Well, we can't discuss it. I said, what do you mean you can't discuss it right now? So then Rob Shaw from Internal Affairs, he says, Ray, we're going to place you on suspension pending the outcome of this case. I'm like, what case? So he asked me, if I had, so my wife, she was still at Winn-Dixie. They going in my house, ripping up, searching for drugs and stuff, money and all this other crazy crap they said. I'm there handcuffed in my garage. So all of a sudden my wife shows up. She's patting out her chest like she's having heart palpitations. The kids are screaming, like what's going on? And so Rob Shaw would say, Ray, we're going to suspend you pending the outcome of this case. I'm like, what case? And nobody would tell me. So I am handcuffed. And of course, as they handcuffed me, the guy Bernard Brown, the tape that I played for you guys, that it was him who arrested me and put me in a cruiser and took me down to District 5. So when I get to District 5, I'm still asking questions. Why am I here? What are you guys arresting me for? And then they was like, well, Ray, we can't discuss. I said, what do you mean you guys can't discuss it?
They at least tell you why you've been arrested.
Right, but they wouldn't tell me nothing. So then they later transported me over to the city jail. So I get to the city jail and I'm still asking questions. Why am I here? So they placed me in solitary confinement. So the very next day, the marshal shows up. I'm like, what the freak is the marshals doing here? This is serious. So of course, the marshal said, well, we're here to take you to court. I said, take me to court for what? I said, well, you guys, Nobody's telling me what I'm here for. Because if they told me what they come to get me for, they probably would have killed me that day, because I've never been in trouble in my entire life. I've never tried a marijuana cigarette in my entire life. I never took a drink a day in my entire life until after this whole entire incident. And the marshals, they handcuffed me and shackled me, put me in an unmarked cruiser, and take me over to federal court. So when I get to federal court, my mom and my wife sitting in the audience. So the DA says, when Mr. Hicks is at work, he's in the top 10% of his department. But when he's not at work, he's into other curricular activity. When you look in this book, I'm titled "I'm Still Standing," you're going to see I brought the documents to show that I was a Gold Cross recipient. I was a Silver Cross recipient. I was 2-time Deputy of the Month. Never been in trouble in my entire life. And she said, when he's at work, he's in the top 10% of the department. When he's not at work, he's into other curricular activity. He went to various states to live in 350 kilograms of cocaine that was equivalent to $750 million.
You had no idea this was coming. This is just complete. You're just like, you didn't know there was an investigation, and and she says that.
No, I went to work that day, came home, went to work out, and I see them mounting up across the street.
Right.
And I'm like, telling my neighbor, like, that must be the drug task force or the SWAT team.
What are you thinking? This is like, are you thinking at this point, I'm being set up, or are you thinking this is a mistake?
No, I'm thinking that this has to be a mistake. I said, and then the judge says to me, well, you're not a flight risk, because I didn't have a passport at the time. She said, but you're a menace to society.
Whoa. Just based on...
I'm a menace to society. How do you go from being a highly decorated officer to a menace to society? The only way you can get a Gold Cross recipient is by risking your life to save another individual life. I risked my life doing an armed carjacking where one round went through the roof of the car. This guy, I thought it was an armed robbery. This young kid, I didn't even know what was going on. I happened to be driving down the street. There's a taxi that is at the red light. And when the taxi pulled up to the red light, when the light turned green, the taxi merged into the fence. So I see these two black guys fighting. So I said, let me just stop and break up the fight. So in the process of breaking up the fight, I discovered that they wrestled over .357 Magnum. One round went through the roof of the car. The subject took a chunk out of the victim's eye. But I took the gun from him. And the subject took off running, so I got on my phone and called communication, advised a signal 041 that just transpired, and I set up a perimeter. They later arrested this 18-year-old. Come to find out, he got in the taxi cab off of 6th Street. And the taxi took him off of 21st Avenue in Oakland Park to an apartment, according to the report that I read. He went upstairs and retrieved the gun, came back downstairs and told the taxi cab driver to get in the passenger seat. And he got in the driver's seat. So as I'm coming down the street, the taxi cab driver saw a chance to grab the steering wheel, and that's when the vehicle emerged into the fence. And I happened to be coming down the street at the same time. I get the Gold Cross Award, the highest award that anyone could ever receive without getting killed in the line of duty.
Now you're a menace to society.
The very next year, I'm a menace to society. I'm faced with natural life imprisonment without possible parole for drug trafficking charges.
So what do you say to your lawyer? What's happening? What do you ask your lawyer? What's going on?
Well, they gave me a court-appointed attorney.
Right.
And of course, the judge, she sentenced me. She gave me a no-bond hold. Wouldn't even give me a bond. She gave me a no-bond hold. They put me at the Federal Detention Center in Miami. And when I arrived there, they treated me like I was the lowest scum on the face of this earth. There's a certain way that you strip search an inmate. But the way that they call themselves handling me was inhumane. And I told them about it. And next thing you know, they went and got me, put me in an orange jumper and took me up and put me in the hole. I stayed in the hole for 5 months.
So what is when did you meet with the public defender? What is
he came a few days after, and he says, Ray, I was appointed, his name was Marty Fakenbaum. He said, I was appointed by the court to come and represent you. I said, okay, sir. And we sat down, we talked like you and I speaking right now.
Right.
And he asked me, I said, first of all, why am I here? I said, these people said that I was trafficking cocaine. I said, that's a lie. I got documents in here to show you that I'm at work. I said, first of all, how could I be traveling to these various states delivering 350 kilograms of cocaine? My wife worked that night at the Postal Service. I was there with my 2 daughters. I said, and furthermore, I'm at work. When they said I was traveling to all these states, I'm at work. What's amazing to me, Matt, is the fact that the Broward Sheriff Office has a fiduciary duty, internal affairs, that if a man or woman commit a crime, they have to call you down there for questioning. They have to give you a garage statement. At no time did they ever ask me, they never asked me if I was associated or affiliated with any type of wrongdoing, anything of that nature. They just showed up at my home. These are the same guys that actually went into my vehicle. My wife and I had bought a Mercedes, and my brother was washing the car. And as my brother was washing the car, the same task force, drug task force, go in the car without a search warrant, searched the car, and said, how could I afford this type of vehicle? It was a Mercedes, but the car had expensive emblems on the back of it. The car was a 1993 400 SEL, but they had V12 600 on the back of it. On the side it said V12, and on the back it said S600. So BSO, these officers that went in the car said, oh, he must have been selling drugs to own this type of automobile. Where's the camera on this car? So my brother said, man, you guys know who that is. That's my brother. He worked for the sheriff department. My identification was in the console of the car. These are the same people who showed up in my home and took me into custody, who arrested me. But they're the ones that are crooks, not me. And I told my attorney this, I said, listen, you need to do your homework, man. I said, and furthermore, I'm not going to take something that I didn't do. He says, Ray, I'm telling you, you're faced with natural life imprisonment. This is the feds. The feds got a 98.8% conviction rate. I told him, I said, God got a conviction rate of 0%, and I'm not taking anything. I wouldn't even take time served. I'm going to trial, man. And he told me, he says, Ray, he said, so he did his own investigation. And he said, Ray, on the manuscript, write down everything that happened. He said, because one day this could possibly be a bestseller book, maybe a movie. I took his advice and I began to write. And then all of a sudden they give me another court-appointed attorney, Mr. Ruben Garcia. He come in and under coercion, he says, Raymond, listen, you're faced with a lot of time, young man. I said, I'm not faced with nothing. So I'm constantly getting into an argument with these guys because they trying to force me to take a plea for something I have not done. I said, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told Mr. Fagenbaum. I refuse to take anything. I won't even take time served. I'd rather go to prison for the rest of my life because I'm not going to admit to something that I did not do.
Have you got discovery by this point? Have you seen any evidence that they have, or is it just a police statement?
No, they didn't. They never gave me the discovery until 2 weeks prior to trial.
What is the discovery? What does it say?
The discovery was saying something to the effect that the informant, Ansel Pratt, the guy who I was just showing you guys earlier, he was arrested on 1/11 of 2000 for aggravated assault with a firearm, where he chased this man down the street, Mr. Eddie Frazier, chased the man down the street because he went to collect his money for dumping Ansel Pratt trash. So next thing, the Broward Sheriff Office arrested him. And that's the same guy they used as an informant. They paid him $20,000, $15,000 to come in and lie and testify against me, to say that me and my co-defendants was actually into drug transaction, which was a lie. We was all working out. The warehouse that we worked out in, there was professional athletes, there was police officers, there was people from the community. Everybody worked out there. So, and this guy, Ansel Pratt, who's a compulsive liar. And as a matter of fact, he said on December 24th, 1999, him and his wife was at a red light. And he said, I pulled up next to them and point my finger out the window that I was going to shoot the two of them. So Finally, my wife went through her thrift savings. She got an attorney by the name of Michael Bloom. Mr. Bloom was a federal attorney, never lost a case in 15 years. And when he came to visit me, he said, Ray, you're not a drug dealer. He told my wife and my mother, he said, your husband and your son is not a drug dealer. I know a drug dealer when I see one. He's definitely not one of them. And I'm going to do everything within my power to help him get home. And Mr. Bloom subpoenaed Ansel Pratt's wife. Her name was Miss Shirley Pratt. She worked for the Postal Service. She came in and he actually said, ma'am, on December 24th, your husband testified to the court and the jury that my client pointed his finger at the two of you at a red light and motioned that he was going to shoot you. She said, my husband's telling a lie. She said, my husband and I was not even together on December 24th, 1999. And she said, and furthermore, he's a compulsive liar. But I found out later that it was him and the detective who went in my car that went to the grand jury.
Did they ever find any drugs, any evidence?
There was never no drugs.
It's just, well, I mean, saying they could have planted drugs.
It was all fabricated.
So it's just one guy giving a statement and they get an indictment against you for selling whatever it is, 300 kilos of cocaine or something.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, this guy was a compulsive liar because he also said that he saw a duffel bag that was filled with cocaine and money. He said 350 kilograms of coke. You can't even get 350 kilograms of coke in a freaking bag with $750 million. That's the biggest lie that ever been told. And this and during the court trial, you're gonna read in this book right here, I'm Still Standing, where he said that there was a bag. When they played the tape for the jury and the judge, it was a vacuum cleaner. It was one of those huge vacuum cleaner where you vacuum your car and trucks and stuff. That's what it was, a vacuum cleaner. It was not even a duffel bag, as he said, was full with cocaine and money. He lied there. Then he lied and said I was giving confidential law enforcement information, this informant. FCIC, NCIC. My attorney, he actually subpoenaed the communication operator. Her name is Kathy Munez. She came in and testified. She said, Mr. Hicks has not ran this information. And she went on to say you have to take a 40-hour course. There's a certificate of completion from FDLE, and there's a sign-in sheet, and you have to use a social security number. She said, Mr. Hicks has not ran this information.
Right. So your certificate, your everything would already be in the computer showing you pulled that report.
Exactly.
And it wasn't there.
Exactly.
Well, was there any way for them to prove that you'd ever had communication with this guy?
No, there was no communication. None.
So this is just some random guy that they said, hey, look, we're having an issue with this officer. You need to say this.
Exactly.
And then they get this on recording.
They debriefed him. They debriefed him, and for him to say exactly what I'm conveying to you all right now.
And then they get an indictment based on that information.
Yes, they get an indictment, from the information that was given to the grand jury by the detective who arrested me, by the detective who actually went in my car and searched my car without probable cause, Richard Pasanti and Joe Damiano. And I'm saying to myself, how is it that these people can do this, man? First of all, how do you defend yourself when these guys are going to the grand jury? You don't get a chance to talk to the grand jury.
Right.
So they said I was dealing all these drugs and money when in fact it's the biggest lie they ever been told. I got records. I went back and did a thorough investigation after all this stuff. And as a matter of fact, how about this? They said I was on audio tape. The same tape that I played for you guys today that I sent to this brother, Kobe, it's the same person who arrested me. It's the same person that was on the tape giving the information they said I gave. It's in the book, and it's titled Missing Documents Turn Up in Deputy Lawsuit. They thought it was my voice on the wiretap. It was the deputy who arrested me. All of them was promoted to a higher rank.
All right, so at this point, and I was going to say, then they give you two attorneys that are basically trying to tell you, take a deal.
Well,
right?
They got off the case.
Right, I understand. Now you got a new attorney.
Yes.
He's saying, we're going to go to trial, so you're going to go to trial. what's happening? Just you said 2 weeks beforehand, you find this out. You get the discovery. You realize, okay, they've got basically one guy.
Right.
And so you're moving forward. You've obviously got multiple instances where you can prove that the informant is lying. You're headed toward trial. Does the U.S. attorney, typically the U.S. attorney, if they don't think they can win or they think something's funky, they're going to try and come to you and trying to get you to take some kind of deal.
And that's what they did. What you just said is paramount.
Okay.
Because they come to me and they tell, before I get Mr. Bloom to represent me, before my wife go through her thrift saving, with the court-appointed attorney, Mr. Ruben Garcia, they offer me 16 and a half months. They say, Mr. Hicks, he come telling me, Ray, you've been down for 11 and a half months. They want to offer you 16 and a half months, but you want to testify against these other 6 people. I told him, I'm not testifying against nobody. If they did wrong, you go get them, but you're not going to use me. I said, I worked out with these guys in the gym. We were seeing who was the strongest. I said, but the thing about it, I'm not going to go in there and admit to something that I don't have no knowledge of. If they did something wrong, you go get them. But you're definitely not going to use me to like go in there and lie on these people. Well, they can give you a 5K1. You know, you've been down for 11 and a half months. You'll do 3 more months and go home and you'll be with your wife and kids. And I told him, I said, let me tell you something, mister. It got to a point that the officers in visitation had to come in because really I wanted to come across that table at him to let him know who the freak you think you playing with, man. My wife and kids suffering right now, and you trying to get me to take time for something that I didn't do? I told him, I said, I told the first attorney, I'm going to tell you the same thing. I'd rather take life imprisonment. So what I did, Matt, is I set him up. I set Mr. Garcia. I said, you know what? I began to give him information that I knew about that happened at the Broward Sheriff Office, such as a pyramid scheme, where they had over 200 some officers affiliated with this pyramid scheme. It's punishable up under 5 years in Florida State Prison and a $5,000 fine. And I began to tell him about the corruption that I witnessed when I was out there working narcotics and everything else. But I did that because I knew he was going to go back and he was going to feed this information to the DA, which is what he did. United States Attorney. And of course, he came back to me and pulled me out. And he says, Ray, I went to lunch with the district attorney, and she said that you're not in here because of the corruption, but you're in here because of your environment. And that's when I wrote a thorough letter that I got a typewriter placed on the floor where I was in 7 West. And of course, the letter says that per our conversation, I never gave you authorization to go and discuss my information with the DA, which is protected upon attorney-client privileges. Why would you go discuss this information with her without my authorization? And that's when he made a decision. He said, you know what? Okay, I'm getting off this case. So finally, my wife went through her thrift, and she was able to, to get the attorney to come and represent me. But if I may just back up for a second, Matt, when I tell you these people literally try to destroy me, man, they put me in the hole for 5 months. Total darkness. And the officer was jigging at me every single day. You that effing cop. You that crooked cop. I hope you're gone for the rest of your life. I told him, I said, no, I wasn't no crooked cop. I was a highly decorated officer. Yeah, but you tell it to the court. I said, I will tell it to the court. And it got to a point where I started pushing the emergency button in the unit. There's a red button inside the unit for emergency purposes, and I started pushing it repeatedly because at this point, I started doing like 1,000, 1,500 push-ups every other day because I'm conditioning my body and my mind because I know that at some point, I'm going to have to go to war. And Mr. Fernandez, I'll never forget him the longest day I live. He called me out and he says, Ray, he said, you come here. And they handcuffed me and shackled me. They had me put my hand through the slot where they feed you. They handcuffed me. Then they came in and shackled me and took me to his office. And when I got to his office, I said, I have not even spoken to my kids and my wife. And he gave me a phone call. And after that phone call, it was heart-wrenching, man, to hear my wife and kids. And, and he says, Ray, listen, the only other way you're going to be able to use the phone, man, besides your attorney, is you're going to have to go down to general population. I told them, I don't care where you put me. And of course, they put me in GP. They put me in general population. I was down there with 8 guys who I had arrested or I was over when I worked in the jail. And every last one of them gave me the utmost respect. They were like, no, man, not you, Big Hicks. No, man. And here come this black dude that saw my picture paraded over the newscast from Dade County, talking about he hate effing cops, And one of the guys that knew me, Mario, he said, man, you know who that is? He said, you know who that is, man? That's Big Hicks. He said, he come from where we come from. And all of a sudden, I goes in there to put down my bedroll. And as I'm putting down my bedroll, there he is. There's 122 inmates in the unit. And of course, I go and put my bedroll down. There he is in the door because they done gather around the door. I told him, I said, dude, you got a problem with me? I said, come on in here. We can handle this like men. You running your mouth, you bumping your gums. I said, come on in here. We can handle this like men. So what he tried to do, he tried to rush me. And when he tried to rush me, I literally tried to beat him to death. I've been fighting ever since I was 6 years of age, man. Ever since I was 6 years old, I've been fighting. And anybody that know me from the streets will tell you, man, it's a shame. It's a disgrace, man. It's a disgrace. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, man, what these people's put me through. But I literally tried to kill him, Matt. I tried to put my fist through his brains. And all of a sudden, the officer ran in because there was only one officer in the unit. He ran up and everybody scattered, and they finally moved this guy to 8 West, 9 West, wherever. I don't know where he went. As long as they got him from around me, because I really wanted to finish him, to be honest with you. Because they had and the feds used to get sardines. And that lid is like a razor blade, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the jumper that we wore, the green jumper that we wore, I kept me a cap with me, to be honest with you. Because I know at this point, I'm in a situation. I mean, come on, man, you can't take an officer and put him in GP. That's a death threat, man. If a person don't know how to defend themselves, you listen, you done. But you know what's strange, Matt, is that even while I was there as an inmate, and you can see it in the book, I won a life-saving award. The officer walked out the unit, had to go to the restroom. And all of a sudden, this black guy who was shot in his head a long time ago, he started having seizures and convulsions where he swallowed his tongue. So the guy started calling me, big homie. Man, come. So I ran out on the rec yard, and there he is. He swallowed his tongue. So the warden of the institution gave me a life-saving award. So the same type of officer that I was out for the Broward Sheriff Office is the same thing I'm displaying while I'm an inmate faced with natural life imprisonment without possible parole.
Using forgeries and bogus identities, Matthew B. Cox, one of the most ingenious con men in history, built America's biggest banks out of millions. Despite numerous encounters with bank security, state, and federal authorities, Cox narrowly, and quite luckily, avoided capture for years. Eventually, he topped the U.S. Secret Service's most wanted list and led the U.S. Marshals, FBI, and Secret Service on a 3-year chase, while jet-setting around the world with his attractive female accomplices. Cox has been declared one of the most prolific mortgage fraud con artists of all time by CNBC's American Greed. Bloomberg Businessweek called him the mortgage industry's worst nightmare, while Dateline NBC described Cox as a gifted forger and silver-tongued liar. Playboy magazine proclaimed his scam was real estate fraud, and he was the best. Shark in the Housing Pool is Cox's exhilarating first-person account of his stranger-than-fiction story. Available now on Amazon and Audible.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say like it'd be different. Like putting an officer, or an FBI agent, or a DEA agent, or something in a low security prison where it's a protective custody is vastly different than you sticking them in general population. You're gonna get killed. Like not that you're gonna get killed, but I mean it's extremely dangerous because you have some of those guys that just they have no reason at all. Like they hate cops. They're gang members and they've got a vendetta against cops, or there's a group of them and they're against cops and they just hate them and there's nothing you can do about it. They're going to come after you. So when he said general population, I thought, oh no.
Yeah, they put me in GP.
So did you, what ended up happening with?
So going back to the trial, so the judge asked the question, where the drugs? No drugs. Where the money? No money. He said, so you mean, why is this, you mean to tell me you have nothing to substantiate the charges? This was the chief judge, Judge Recker. Judge Recker would give you 1 million years. His mustache was rolled up at the end, This man didn't even play. I mean, he would give you 1 million years and thought nothing of it. And he said, you mean to tell me you bring a highly decorated officer in my courtroom and you have nothing to substantiate the charges? Why is he here? So they lied and said I was giving confidential law enforcement information. They found out through testimony, Captain Munez, she said, I worked in this capacity for 25 years. Mr. Hicks has not ran this information. It's controlled through your social security number. Then they lied and said I was on audio tape. When they played the audio tape, they found out that it was the same person who arrested me. The same tape that I played for you guys, Internal Affairs called him down there.
Did this happen all at the first hearing or this play out during a trial?
No, this played out during trial.
Okay.
And of course, the jury deliberated. They came back with a not guilty verdict within 30 minutes.
How long did you do in jail?
16 and a half months.
Did they reinstate the charge? Did they try and go, because, well, it's not guilty. Okay, so no, it's not guilty. They're done. There's nothing they can do.
Done.
There's nothing they can do.
No.
Did you walk out right then?
Yeah, the judge walked as a matter of fact, he allowed my wife to bring me food from the outside. From Papa John to KFC, from Tom, Dick, and Barbecue, and to me and the rest of my co-defendants.
Okay, so it wasn't just you; it's the whole group.
Yes.
Was there anything along? Was basically all of the evidence geared towards you or them also? This is just your workout buddies.
Yeah, these are guys that I worked out with. And they were trying to say that these guys, apparently BSO had an investigation going on with them, right? And they were trying to, because I spoke out. Because I spoke out against the corruption, they just took me and threw me in the pot to say that, I'm a drug dealer. These guys were no drug dealers. These guys were actually delivering Coca-Cola with 18-wheeler truck from here to Jacksonville. And I'm saying to myself, where they get? They got all the information from this freaking this guy Ansel Pratt. But one thing is for sure, you can do things wrong to people. I don't care if it's me, my wife, my mother, my kids, or whoever. At some point, it's gonna come back to you. The guy who arrested me, Bernard Brown, he was 50-something, about 54 years of age. He just died recently. For what reason? I don't even know. Ansel Pratt, the one that the informant who they call themselves using, he had a massive stroke, had 5 massive strokes. He couldn't feed himself. He couldn't walk. He couldn't talk. He couldn't clean himself. No, nothing. He just died recently. The sergeant that I went to from Internal Affairs, who said he was going to conduct a thorough investigation because he said that he heard that from other people who had filed complaints against those officers that went in my car. Well, he recently passed away. So one thing is for sure, it's my relationship with God. It's my relationship with God. It's my family. Because if it wasn't, then we wouldn't be having this conversation, man. I'd rather for you to kill me than for you to put me through what you put me and my wife and kids through. I lost everything. I lost my home, my cars, my finances. I couldn't even feed my family. And it got to a point that I started drinking. I never took a drink a day in my life. I went to the hospital for anxiety and depression 5 times. And I'm saying to myself, how could these people do this to me, man? When I worked my way out the hood, to have a house for me and my family, and I lose everything for what? I did nothing, absolutely nothing. But through it all, man, the word of God says in Romans 12:17, repay no evil for evil. By doing so, God said, vengeance is mine. I'll repay, said the Lord. He said, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he thirsty, give him a drink. By doing so, God said, it's like taking hot coals and placing them on the top of their head. So to be honest with you, it's my